Very welcome again to the second last day of the Central Asia Masterclass. It's with a lot of pleasure that I introduce you Professor Slavomír Horák from Charles University, who has been an assistant professor at the Department of Russian and East European Studies at the Institute of International Studies. You are foremost a Turkmenistan expert. That was your basic expertise, but since you have been working on that issue on that country, in that region for, I don't know how long.
Many years.
10 years?
Many years.
Many years, I'll keep it at that, many years. You have written many books and articles and have done much research on the internal development of different Central Asian countries and also Afghanistan, right? Okay. So we're all looking forward to your historical geopolitics of Central Asia lecture.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And to go immediately into the topic, well, historical geopolitics of Central Asia, or even without Central Asia, historical geopolitics. Maybe sometimes it seems to you that, well, geopolitics, it's something we are talking about right now in a contemporary history, current issues dealing with journalists, newspapers are full of this word geopolitics. It seems that geopolitics is something which appeared just recently. At the same time, we must say that geopolitics is very old discipline, despite the fact that it was not named as geopolitics. To be absolutely in extreme side of history, starting to fight for different pastures, we might even we could find some geopolitics among the first human tribes, because they also had some space they wanted to live, and they want to expand in case of necessary. So historical geopolitics matters because students usually think about that as in a contemporary framework. But as I will demonstrate on a case of Central Asia, the geopolitics has very long history. So this is one of the very important points we should talk about when speaking about historical geopolitics. Second, usually it seems today that Central Asia is some kind of subject or victim even sometimes of geopolitics, saying, well, there are interests of different great powers, global, regional, speaking mostly about Russia, China, US, and maybe some others like Turkey, India, Iran, and so on. But we will see in the course of this class that Central Asia very often also played very significant role, not as victim, but as a very important player. So this is another very important problem we have to point out. This lecture actually could be cross-linked with another two chapters of our handbook, the chapter on definition and delineation of Central Asia, and plus also another chapter which is supposed to be written by Sébastien Pérouse about regional space and let's say speaking more about contemporary geopolitics, Silk Roads, and so on. So I will also touch these problems somehow, but in a different way and in a different perspective. Okay, what should we talk about during this lecture? First of all, we should tell something about what is geopolitics, what are the dimensions of geopolitics. I don't want to bore you with a history of geopolitics, naming different names, different authors, although I will do it sometimes, but I will not do it as a complete lecture. This is not actually the aim of this class, but we should define what kind of geopolitics, what dimensions of geopolitics we might encounter in our analysis. Then, why geopolitics matters? Why is so important to speak about geopolitics, and why is so important to analyze geopolitics? Also, one of the, let's say, part of this first section of our lecture. And later on, we will talk about, let's say, selected cases of geopolitical issues in Central Asian historical history. Of course, I can't, in 1.5 hours, repeat whole history of Central Asia. But it's also on you to pick up some aspects, some historical period in which you might analyze the geopolitics of Central Asia in history. So here you have several case studies we will talk about, and maybe some a little bit more mentioning of some historical periods. But nevertheless, I will talk about the concept, geopolitical concept of two sometimes antagonistic, sometimes cooperative words, Iran and Turan. Then I will talk also about the great empires in Central Asia as the tool of contemporary local geopolitics within Central Asia, because as we will see, there is no just this global geopolitics. Then I will talk about some geopolitical concepts in the past, like a Silk Road. And of course, we can't bypass great power struggles over Central Asia in a modern history. It means starting from 19th century up to contemporary issues. And we will see how real is this practical, let's say, geopolitics, and how virtual might this game be. Okay, so first of all, what is geopolitics? Okay, I don't want to repeat numerous definitions of geopolitics. It's, I think, not necessary. You can find it in many books. However, I would like to point out what could be geopolitics, what might we include under geopolitics. Well, of course, as a name, the very name of geopolitics tell us this is something between geography and politics, their mutual interaction. Geography and space, these two words are very important in connection with politics and political development. And politicians, because they also are quite important aspect of geopolitics. And not only politicians, but also those who prepare for politicians the concepts of geopolitics. They are also very important part of geopolitics and very important actors of geopolitics, as we will see. Okay, what includes geopolitics? First of all, we have this geographical dimension, geographical part. Usually, it says and provides that geopolitics is some kind of determined by geography. Yeah, to some extent it's true. If you look at the topography of some region, its climate, access or non-access to seas, rivers, and other transport communication, this is something which is done and it's quite hard to change. As we will see on Central Asia, to be more exact. So, okay, in Central Asia you always have different clusters of geopolitics determinants. First of all, on a northern part, what today is Kazakhstan, but as we will see, today's contemporary states need not to be the main issue. We even try to forget about the names of the states because the borders, states changed in the course of history. And while, let's say, topography of Central Asia changed in much slower way, although it also changed. So we have in the north, we have steppes which creates incredibly convenient transit corridor from east to west and from north to south. And this corridor was used, if you remember, all migration waves which went through Central Asia to another parts. We can start from probable moving of Iranian tribes from north to south to contemporary Iran or Persia. We can speak, of course, about several waves of Turkic nations going through this corridor to west or south to another cluster we have in Central Asia, which is oasis, with total different conditions for life, while pastures and steppes are convenient for cattle and other nomadic initiatives. While here, limited land which should be also which should be worked out through water, through irrigations, doesn't enable you to have big space in your history as you have in these steppes. And plus, we have mountain cluster. And also depends on a definition of Central Asia. This mountain cluster could extend to limited number of mountains we have today in Central Asia. But as we will see in a history, this was also considered as part of Central Asia and belongs to these mountainous clusters. And plus, we have, let's say, some borders of Central Asia, natural borders, which are also based on mountain ranges. So yes, we have some kind of topography. Climate, you might also think about this issue in Central Asia, starting from, again, northern parts belonging to at least some part of steppe regions, and even in the far north, we might speak about forest regions. While again, big problem which is created here in a central part of Central Asia, and these are Karakum and Kizilkum deserts. Again, access to the sea, which is and was in some course of history quite important part of Central Asian geopolitics. To be precise, non-access to the sea. If you might think that what happened when Europeans opened the sea route from Europe to India. This was one of the factors which caused decline of Central Asian connection with outside world. So access or non-access to the sea matters. Okay, from human geography, we might see also, and we will talk about that, I think, in other lectures, but many waves of changing, migration waves, changing in demography, wars, military campaigns, and also, last but not least, cultural dimension, which will be, as we will see, quite important part of geopolitics as well. Economy. Well, here also, while this human geography, human factor might be a little more volatile, more differentiate and more rapidly changing factor. Some economical factor might be changing, and some economical factor might be on a place. First of all, speaking about, for example, agricultural lands, this is something which doesn't change for quite a long time, unless, again, in the last century, human geography did not change. Substantial parts of Central Asia, for example, through irrigation from deserts or semi-deserts to arable lands. But natural resources, something which is done and which is used and exploited in this way. And of course, this is one of the very important issue, very important part around which Central Asian geopolitics is turning around right now. But we might see in the past, these natural resources were not as important as today. And of course, transport and trade. We'll demonstrate it on the Silk Road, transport and trade, which matters, Silk Road trade throughout the Eurasian continent, and let's say the Chinese project of new Silk Road, which also includes Central Asia as very important, at least part of Central Asia, as very important transport hub through which the goods should be transported from China to outside world. So, okay, we have this geographical dimension, which is partly determined by this natural environment, but which are partly might be partly quite dynamic when speaking about human geography. Political dimension. Well, okay, this is a little bit different point. If we speak about political dimension of geopolitics, very important, it's connected with the words like influence, control, or even formation of politics over some state, territory, region, group of states, and so on. And very often in this discourse, it's used very antagonistic ways of interpretation. It means we talked about sea and land, or land, access to the sea, and non-access to the sea. Juxtaposing sea powers and land powers. Probably we will come back to that point when speaking about Mackinder's theory of geopolitics. Or in more general way, very often we might speak about this dichotomy. We, on one side, we great power, we who are entitled to bring the light of civilization, and other reasons why geopolitics might work in some certain region, and they, who has to be suppressed, who has to be under our control, who has to be controlled or culturally influenced, who has to be economically used or abused. So this dichotomy might work also in this way in connection with the political dimension of geopolitics. We have several examples of this juxtaposition, not only towards some region, I mean one big state, one great power, but also juxtaposing great powers with each other, which is also one of the very important aspects, not only this vertical dimension, but horizontal dimension, the struggle between two or different or several powers in or over some region. And we have some either real geopolitical concept or conceptual things, conceptual geopolitical struggle, like in Islam we have this two issues. I'm sorry, there is a mistake. Of course, it should be here. Or two great powers, as in Central Asia, there are. In 19th century, we had the so-called Great Game. Basically, participants and those who considered themselves as a power: UK, United Kingdom, and Russia. And one another thing, which is quite important, I think, to mention, because we might have geopolitics. Speaking about geopolitics, we usually speak about these great powers, global powers. But as we might see, and we will see also on a Central Asian case, geopolitics matters even in a regional or even local level. We might have these great powers. That's one point. But let's have a look on the geopolitical struggle, for example, within Central Asia. How maybe, however, might be virtual, but we saw in the 90s and to some point up to today some kind of geopolitical struggle over Central Asia, over dominance in Central Asia between Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. They consider themselves in one or another period of contemporary development as like a first primus inter pares in the region. And so we might have this geopolitical struggle also within the region. Going a little bit aside from my homeland, Czech Republic, well, we also used to have some kind of regional way or maybe in local level, some kind of geopolitics. When Czechoslovakia was established, some authors and some quite realistically and quite seriously talked about our colonies in the east, which is what's today part of Western Ukraine and Slovakia. I know that our Slovak brothers would be offended by this, but it was seriously discussed in some certain Prague circles. So you can see that this geopolitics might be found not only in this global, on this global level, but also in this regional and even local scale. I didn't speak about speaking about the human geography. I forgot to mention one quite important issue, which also influenced geopolitical thinkers or thinkers in geopolitics, and it's also this is let's say density of population and distribution of population. Well, we can see Uzbekistan as the most densely populated region. It means it makes Uzbekistan up to today attractive geopolitical partner, or let's say the geopolitical subject. It depends on the interpretation we have, simply because it has large population. While Kazakhstan, also a very important partner, but sometimes due to the fact that Kazakhstan is less populated, roughly twice less populated than Uzbekistan, the geopolitical attractivity of this country lies in its territory, in its large territory, but not in the population. Well, the example of one dichotomy, antagonism of geopolitical conception, it's one of the very clear ones. This is actually this first one, this first picture showing expansion of Muslim world and division of Muslim world on Darul Islam and on one side and Darul Harb on the other side, which is actually used as a geopolitical concept today by some radical jihadist groups, as this map might show you. So on one side, there are the regions which are under the control of Islam even today. And sometimes even to come back to this regional level or even local level, we might see that there might be just in some interpretation, in some radical groups' interpretation, just one small territory when the only right Islam is practiced. For example, we had it recently in a geopolitics or geopolitical thinking, if we can speak about geopolitics, within so-called Islamic State, which considered their own state as the only one, as the only right Darul Islam, while other, even though they are considered as Muslim regions, Muslim territories, these are the regions of Darul Harb because they do not follow the right Islam. And of course, speaking about other non-Muslim regions, it was obvious that these regions must be also the part of this dual geopolitical thinking. I have another dichotomy, which is global scale. We talked about some, let's say, more regional issues, but this is actually the map showing you, for example, my childhood geopolitical dichotomy. I think you recognize it quite well. We usually spoke about socialist world which my country was part of under the leadership of Soviet Union, and so-called capitalist world. In some literature, you might encounter with the first, second word, while other parts were considered as part of so-called third world, and this third world might be the arena of geopolitical struggle. It was not the arena of geopolitical struggle. It was not, maybe with the exception of China, at least starting from Soviet-Chinese conflict in the 60s. But this was not considered as the place where the others, the other world, other part of geopolitical game should intervene in. Typical example, I'm sorry to coming back or moving from Central Asia, some parts to Central Europe, but invasion of Soviet troops into Hungary or Czechoslovakia. It was not in the interest of this part to intervene. Because, why? Because geopolitical thinking tell us, no, this is their matter, we are here, they are there, and this, let's say, border is not advisable, it was not good to cross. So it means now I come to the point why geopolitics matters. Speaking about geopolitics, yes, we can always speak about the scientific geopolitics, saying there are numerous books on geopolitics of Central Asia, or numerous articles. When I went through preparing this lecture, when I went through the databases, Google Scholar, books, libraries, and so on, I would name you like hundreds of articles dealing in some way or another with geopolitics of Central Asia in scientific way. But that's one point, let's say, dimension of geopolitics. However, very important and substantial part of geopolitics consists of what we might see as a practical geopolitics or geopolitics as a political discipline. Discipline which influences the policymakers, not necessarily to be politicians who are the movers or who are in charge of preparing geopolitics decision, but there are people who prepare the papers, who speaks, who writes the articles, and influencing in this way the public opinion and, of course, policymakers. This kind of let's say, political part of geopolitics, political dimension of geopolitics, might be quite volatile. We will see on the example of here you have quite a good picture of why geopolitics matters. Of course, I can provide you with the same picture from White House in Washington. I can provide you probably the same picture from French presidential palace or others. But these are people who, let's say, might make geopolitics in practice, and there are a lot of people behind them who prepare this kind of geopolitics. We will see the example of Halford Mackinder, who brought, and I will see one quite interesting actually issue. You probably this map you know. This is part of Heartland Geopolitical Theory, which Mackinder published in 1919. But if you look how this term heartland was moved in Mackinder's perception. Look, we have three heartlands of one author. One from 1904, another one from 1919, and another one from 1943. And of course, logical question, why aren't they the same? Or at least, well, maybe they are the same in one particular region here. All three, let's say, projects or all three boundaries, scopes are included Central Asia as well. But other parts are quite highly volatile. Well, I think the answer is quite clear because of changing political situation in the world. If you compare the world in 1994, 1919, and 1943, the difference might be quite apparent. I don't want to talk about in details about these geopolitical thinkers and the history of geopolitics, but just to demonstrate to you how dependent might be scientists on, let's say, some particular geopolitical situation in the world. So it means geopolitics might be very situational discipline. And it comes to the point, okay, so if it is so highly situation issue, so isn't this big geopolitical concept we are talking about, we write about, speaking about geopolitics in Central Asia. If you look of most of these articles, many of them, they start to refer as Halford Mackinder in, and now in 1904 or 1919 or 1943 brought up or wrote Central Asia is heartland or part of heartland, part of pivot of pivot of geopolitics and so on. But in reality, if you look on these changing borders, we might see that this is a little bit myth or some kind of virtual, we might call today virtual game. And even this terminology, as we saw on the example of heartland, might be used according to the certain concrete geopolitical situation. We have another concept. I don't want to repeat many concepts of in which Central Asia played some role, but let's look at Haushofer's concept of geopolitics, dividing the world into, let's say, four parts, which should be, let's say, more or less autonomous. Economically self-sufficient, politically and geopolitically self-sufficient, Pan-American, Euro-Afrique. And this is the most interesting part we should be interested in. Pan-Russia. But look, Haushofer worked out this concept and this map when? Before 1941. And it would be quite interesting to see the same map of Halford geopolitics after 1941. Is there Pan-Russia here in this concept after Barbarossa operation? Question. Okay, so at this point we might have a short break, just 5 minutes to have a coffee, tea, and then we'll continue to concrete parts, concrete historical geopolitics of Central Asia. So thank you for now. Maybe questions afterward.